So we're going to be kicking off the masterclass today. We're going to be talking about how to maximize NRR, super timely session, what I think I'd probably call the new startup North Star, at least for Accord and hopefully other companies out there thinking about how to drive more efficient growth, the name of the game these days. And we're joined by an awesome group of folks. I'll let them introduce themselves, but maybe I can kick things off. So Ross Rich, CEO and co-founder of Accord. And Connor, the great suggestion of kind of describing what our go-to-market motion is to kind of contextualize some of the conversation today. So Accord, we sell, it's about a 10-ish K ACV. We kind of sell along with our product. So we do a free trial for about a week or two with our customers. We land with about 5 or 10K land and then expand from there. So might be very different than folks that are selling large upfront contracts. So keep that in mind. But I'll pass things off to Alex maybe to share a bit about himself, his role and the product they're selling so we can contextualize the chat today.
Thanks everybody for dialing in and making time in your day. This should be a fun conversation and hopefully you'll get some good learnings from some of us or all of us as we go through. So my role, I work at NYCHEX as the head of account management and sales for North America for our shipper vertical. Most of my career has been in a revenue quota carrying role. I've had 8 years of sales management experience prior to NYCHEX, mostly in the healthcare technology vertical, as well as the logistics technology where I sit today. I've been at NYCHEX for 3 months, so that'll be my caveat. I will bring in some of my experience from prior worlds and some of what we're building and implementing right now. But the business that NYCHEX is in is actually, again, in the logistics technology space. We're a company that's 7 years old, focused completely on how to drive better shipment transparency, visibility, actionability of your ocean contracts if you were a shipper or an ocean carrier. So a lot of people know this from the last couple of years. Where's my couch? Where is my home furnishings? Where are my electronics? Reliability in the transportation and supply chain world has been at an all-time low the last few years. And so NYCHEX really strives to bring together shippers and ocean carriers with contracts that work, contracts that make sense, that perform really well, both in terms of two main products. One is a contract to a committed contract product. So we actually play matchmaker to two parties that want to work together and provide a framework to be able to have those contracts execute well. The other is a pure software product that actually helps see your entire portfolio, and we ingest all the data for all the different partners you work with. So that's what I'll be talking about a lot today. Our motion is up market in the enterprise space. Average deal size anywhere from, call it $30,000 to $60,000 is kind of the range of most of our motion.
Awesome. And then Connor, over to you.
I'm Connor. I'm the CRO at Shortcut. So I'm most of our customer-facing teams. For those of you that don't know, Shortcut was called Clubhouse once a long time ago until these other shitty Clubhouse people came out of nowhere. But we compete with Jira. So if you've ever seen Jira or if you've ever used Jira and you hate it, hi, I'm at Shortcut. You should call us. But no, seriously, issue tracking and project management for development teams, basically what we do. It's a very heavy PLG motion, which is probably similar to Brian's, but I would imagine Brian has multiple layers there. Our motion is still at this point primarily self-service. So average contract value is like $3,500. The motion is probably 85% self-service, and a lot of our go-to-market and support is influenced by those two factors quite considerably.
Awesome. And Brian, round us out.
Sure, yeah, Brian Reuter, so responsible for a couple of our account management teams here at Figma. Figma is a product design platform trying to help companies build better products, do it virtually, also with a whiteboarding tool called FigJam. We are a full SMB to enterprise solution, though our account management team primarily works with customers that are anywhere between 10K ARR all the way up to a few $100,000 ARR. So that's kind of us and where we're at today, but yeah, happy to share more as we dig in.
Awesome. Well, to dive right into the first question. So we're going to be talking about, again, a timely topic around NRR. A lot of focus, I think, forever around signing new logos. And despite, I think, seeing a lot of talk around NRR and expansion and low churn. I think when people look at resourcing their companies, I don't think that's necessarily where the dollars go. So yeah, it'll be an interesting discussion. I'm excited to learn from some of the folks here around their perspective. But first question, one that I actually just added before the session, because this is a question that I'm super curious to get the perspective of everyone here, as well as folks in the audience, is, who should really own this number? Is this sales in terms of pre-sales? The AE holds onto this deal forever and they're responsible if signing the bad deal and it churns and not getting to success, or expanding with them? Is this post-sales because, hey, AE's brought them in the door and now to make sure they get value and expand, they own that number? Or is this neither and it's product? Hey, the sales team is going to get them in the door. We're going to help take care of them from, an AM, CSM support perspective, but the product needs to work. And that's going to be the reason why that they churn or grow, all that kind of stuff. So Connor said he's going to have some hot takes for us today. So I'll throw it over to you to kick things off and get your perspective here.
Well, so I think it's like worth remembering, like, yeah, I'll probably repeat this a couple times, but like where our perspectives come from, right? And so like mine is very PLG self-service motion here, right? Like one of the things we talked about a bunch early on as the leadership team is like, who owns the revenue number, right? And in a motion where a lot of it is self-service, there is a question of like, well, how, is it marketing? Is it product? Is it sales? Like whatever. Ultimately, we decided to make one person responsible for all of the revenue because we didn't want to create weird scenarios where like sales would do a thing that was good for sales, but was actually bad for the company. And so like there's one level of just like, whose throat do you choke when things are on track versus off track, right? I think the more like nuanced version of the question though is like, as that scatters down to actual teams, like how do you think about like comping and designing like different teams basically? To me, it feels like this moves a lot as the company matures in size. Like I'm now going to amend my earlier comment that say that like it was our price point and our self-service motion. We're also about 100 folks. I don't know where Alex or Brian are. They can kind of color on their answers, but the smaller you are, I think there's a lot of value to having less specificity, right? And like more shared responsibility. Our account management team does things that are customer success related, and they do things that are expansion related, and they do things that are really, truly like kind of blend of a lot of different roles. But as you get to a certain size and scale and you need to drive efficiency, there's going to be a higher push for like extreme account management is responsible for this one number and this is the one thing they do, and like divide and conquer a little bit. So for us, it's a little bit more shared, but that may be personally a function of the size of our teams and business and the maturation that we are at relative to others.
I think it kind of brings up a good point here, which is, for everyone on the call, like as in many nuanced answers, it depends, and it depends on your business. I've kind of been on both schools of this, so I think I've talked out of both sides of my mouth over the course of my career. In some cases, sales owns it, and in some cases, downstream the rest of the client success or account management work owns it. But for us, we're also around 100 people. Our software offering is very early stage for us. So I think most critically in our side is like, how do we go out and acquire customers at our life cycle? Like going to get new logos is actually really, really important for us. Like we won't have as much of a cross-sell motion or an upsell motion or an expand motion if we don't get the base a little bit bigger. And so I think on our side, we're thinking about sales. Our team, we know that they have great relationships. We know that they build trust and understanding of the customer's business, but we also know that like the longer we have them hang on business that we bring on, we are sort of like splitting their attention and their ability to continue to go build logos. And for us at our life cycle, that is just so important. And I think kind of the other point you bring up, which is really good, is wherever you're at today, for those on the phone, you have to think about how does your incentive structure and your compensation plans align to the behaviors that you need your teams to be able to do right now. You've got to make sure that like you create systems that drive the right behavior. If your sales reps are comped, with like a 3-year sunset period on revenue, for example, that they sign, they're always going to have this like connection and I think a little bit of distance from maybe the quarter to quarter performance, in their earnings. So you have to think about that in your plans as you design them.
Yeah. Only thing I'd add here, of course, it all depends on where you're at. I think a couple of things come to mind, like looking back at my previous experience. I was at Zendesk for a while. The last few years that I was there, an AE owned the account in perpetuity. They owned it forever. And then we had a separate customer success team that worked with them very, very closely with a true retention quota. Now that I'm at Figma, we've got an account executive team that does the initial sale and the initial onboarding. Then we have account management that picks it up from there and runs with it. And we're kicking off a process right now to kind of reimagine how we think about this exact question. You know, the point is it's always going to evolve. I think the most important thing, though, is two things. One, you need to also approach it from the customer's perspective, not just how do we get the right person in the right role at our company to the right metric, but how does a customer need to be supported in order to not only realize value up front, but on and on throughout their journey with your company. So I think that's one. And then the other thing I'd add is just being very clear with expectations and having an intentional strategy, not leaving it up to just self-serve because you don't have time for it or the bandwidth for it. You need to have some kind of strategy for it, something that you're continuing to monitor and improve upon over time.
I think, Brian, can I like pull on a thread you poked on there, right? Which is like, what's the best experience for the customer? Like one of the, my hypothesis is that as companies get larger and more established, one of the reasons they can move to extreme specialization is like so much more knowledge is documented, understood. There's more process. There's like everything is more repeatable. The 5 use cases are known, established, and whatever. And so then when I hand off a customer and it's like, oh, it's this use case, like a whole bunch of things like come along with that set of information. Whereas like maybe folks like Alex or myself were like, frankly, we're still figuring some of this shit out, right? Or stuff, sorry. You know, like there's like it's harder to do a lot of those, like handoffs introduce like friction, and the only way you can limit that friction is by like getting it all well documented, understood. I think this is why, I mean, setting aside like the Comcast of the world and people who are terrible at this, like there is a sweet spot of size where I think there's a lot of specialization that is applicable and very interesting.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that I've spent so many hours in meetings and in spreadsheets trying to like maneuver segmentation to minimize the amount of counts that are moving from one person to the next. And as we grow and as we change roles and as we launch new products, there's just always going to be a lot of this friction. You can't really avoid it as much as you might want. And people are going to get promoted and go on parental leave and leave the company. And there's just always going to be friction. And so it's not about preventing that friction as much as it is about, to your point, documenting it, being very clear about what you know in a simplified way. So that way, whoever it does end up with next, because it is going to end up with someone else next, they don't have to, start from scratch.
I think that's the big challenge, right? Is like in an ideal world, I think it's the person that builds the relationship holds on to it. But like you said, that's just not what ends up playing out. So I think that's the big struggle. And it's funny because I think you can look at it 2 ways. One, for high velocity small accounts where it's a 1 or 2 or 3 call close, how much is the lift really going to be for onboarding in CS? Hey, does it make sense because you have those couple conversations, just do 1 or 2 more and then to maintain and monitor it? Cool. What about large accounts? Well, the same argument could be made. Hey, you had 30 meetings with them. It's even harder to pass off. Why wouldn't you hold on to that? Because there's even more potential upsell or harm to the business if they drop. So it's funny, you can kind of make a very reasonable argument for both. For large accounts, hold on to them because they're super important. You can't churn, blah, blah, blah. It's worth it, all this stuff. Same with small ones though. What, you're going to have now massive, super siloed teams to have one conversation with each customer in a different life cycle. You're going to have the one, call close potential. Hey, did the trial. Okay, we'll convert you. Then you're going to have like the 1 or 2 call onboarding. Then you're going to have, a scaled CSM or a support person. So, my personal perspective would be, kind of going back to the life cycle question early on, do the unscalable stuff, hopefully have people that are staying longer, less churn at the company, people that are those builders, have less specialization. And then maybe as you develop, like Connor said, you're getting more resources to go across more things. You're going to have hopefully enablement folks that are educating people so they can come in a conversation and the process to say, okay, this is what it looks like we're trying to accomplish together. We had this great, handoff form or great flow in, your CRM or something like that. But that stuff is also a lot easier said than done. And I see companies continue to scale and scale and scale. I mean, we saw this at Stripe, and you never end up filling that gap because you're hyper growth and you always say you're going to be able to do this later. And then, the customer experience definitely suffers when you don't build in some of those connective tissues as you grow. Cool. All right. Well, definitely, if you want to jump in with your perspective on who should own, I'm seeing some great comments here from Sarah and Levi here. But next question, we're going to talk about upsells. Obviously, a super important kind of one side of NRR. There's the churn, there's the upsells. Curious to hear, for your specific organization, kind of how you got to these answers, and if you're thinking about changing it now, who owns the upsell? Who is responsible for driving that additional expansion opportunity? Yeah, I know, Brian, you mentioned at Figma, you guys are thinking a lot about this right now, and how do you evolve? Curious to hear kind of where you've come from and some of the, kind of decision-making process through where you're gonna go with this.
Yeah, and so at Figma, I lead account management, right? And account management means different things at different places. Sometimes it's more sales, sometimes it's more success. It's often a hybrid, regardless of what the real focus is. At Figma, it's truly a sales-focused role, and that's reflected in the compensation and the targets and how we forecast and all of that. And account management will continue to own the upsell for the most part moving forward. The part that I was alluding to that we're starting to reimagine right now is what ongoing customer onboarding and everboarding looks like, and how do we continually drive value in unique and different ways, especially for our long-term customers that are 3 years past their initial Figma onboarding. How do we make sure that they're continually motivated and inspired and uncovering new ways to add value with the product? But at Figma, the upsell is the primary responsibility of our team in account management. We do have some other partners that we work with, solutions architects, a role that's pretty unique to Figma that's called the designer advocate. So we have some other partners out there, but at the end of the day, the responsibility is on account management.
And how do you ensure because I know you guys have been going up market for a while, say you're signing that Fortune 50 or 100 company, and the reps work with them for a while, they have their champions, they have their executive sponsors, both internally and externally. How do you make sure, if they're in a revenue generating role and you have this amazing opportunity to drive, a lot of efficient revenue and hopefully not have churn, how do you make sure that they can jump in and have those great conversations and relationships with folks? I think that's like my biggest question. How do you solve for that?
Yeah, so right now, even just this morning, a few hours ago, actually, we launched a new handoff between the account executive who lands the deal and the account manager who inherits that deal a bit further down the road. So, I mean, for us, we're at about 600 employees now. It's something that we're still tweaking and evolving as we go. And so it's been a big focus for us. We just did the same kind of a new handoff in the mid-market space for those teams. But we've tried to align on a sales methodology over the last couple of months that really gets everyone speaking the same language, understanding what we're looking for throughout discovery, documents it in a structured and consistent way, going back to that same point before, that kind of boosts up this handoff. So that way, AE number 1 doesn't do things kind of one way, and AE number 2 does things a completely different way, and it's logged in a different way, trying to add as much simplicity into the equation as we can. But yeah, it's something that we're making progress on literally today. So yeah.
Awesome. Anyone else have an opinion on here, guys?
Well, one thing I was going to say is I think the word upsell probably should be broken down. There's like different kinds, right? So you have expansion, you have true. Like I'll define 3 terms for the purpose of the conversation, right? We'll call upsell like the selling of a new part of the product, or like not a separate product, but like not purely an expansion of the existing service offering. We'll call cross-sell like a whole new product that's being brought in, or a whole new team that's being brought on, basically. And for us, because like so much of our business is seat-based, our upsell actually happens a lot of cases organically. And so you can actually make an argument that both CS and account management can be responsible for upsell, because the actions that they're taking should result in additional usage, which drives additional revenue, but does not require the commercial skills of an expansion or cross-sell motion. And so I think when at least for me, a good maybe simplifying principle is when the sales motion requires commercial skills, meaning it requires sales motion and skills, as opposed to just driving usage or driving behavior, and that results in additional revenue. I think that's when you typically see some version of a salesperson get engaged. Whether that's an AE or an AM is an open question. But I think, at least for me, that helps me divide the line between where is customer success focused and where is sales focused? Because in our world, you could very easily see customer success have an NRR number clear as day that is purely based on retention and the expansion of seats in our existing customer base that does not require a commercial transaction in any way, shape, or form. It's purely based on usage growth. You could also have an AM own an expansion and a cross-sell number,
It's outside of the seat. Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. I think that's the right, or closer to probably the right way of thinking about this. And, it's helpful, I think, is, we're working through the similar kind of thing, right? Is like, how much can you impact in each of those roles, the other, right? Like how much, if you're that AE or AM that are having commercial conversations, really going to make them more successful to, expand that number of seats if they're hiring, et cetera. That's probably more of that, like you said, CS or onboarding implementation, or, everboarding, that I love the term Brian just used. And then for the CS side, if you're not having those commercial conversations around, selling them that Fig Jam or that other product that you have, you're not going to be in control of your destiny there. So that's an interesting way of thinking about kind of breaking those up into kind of more impactful things for the team to work on.
I think on our side, I think like both Brian and I think Connor said, our account management function is certainly a growth function. So one that has a revenue number, has revenue expectations to it. And so the persona that you put into that role is obviously slightly different than a pure hunter, a pure seller, because they need to be able to both like follow and run your process and your follow-up and ensure like the customer gets value, but they still need to have some of those commercial chops, which is a little bit different than someone who's just out hunting for a new business. And so, you got to be really good on like, what are the jobs you're asking them to do, and like, how do you hire and put the right people in those roles? But for us, in our traditional product that we've had, which is these two-way committed contracts, there's a couple ways that we can identify expansion. One, just in the initial discussions, we get a sense of their total book of business, and we know that we're taking on a piece of it right away. So again, documentation, really, really critical. You know what part you're gaining, what part is out there to get should the customer be successful, your company perform, and you deliver kind of like what they were looking for, that, gives you and earns you the right to go ask for that additional business. The other things you could certainly have is, if your company or your prospects have data sets or different things to help you understand the whole scope of their business, those things are also really helpful at being able to say, we have this portion of it, but like data that we purchase suggests that there's this much addressable sort of business that they have yet to get. And you make sure that you really capture that in the CRM. Do you bake in check-ins and places to like make sure like, hey, like, are we asking about this portion of the business? Like, are we talking about what they're doing and how they're addressing it today? But I think, Russ, like, I love having account management own a portion of that growth, because I think it helps them, one, feel like an owner of the account. Like you do want account managers, if they're going to truly own the account, to own that, including the portion of growth. I think they really feel responsible for it. But also, like, if they're executing well, and if your model involves touch points or cadence with your customer, you're hoping that they're having those strategic questions, and they're having some version of discovery all the time, which is like, what's going on? What are you guys working on? What are your big strategic initiatives? And they're the closest person to be able to find out where those big growth opportunities might be, if they're doing that, if that's part of your model.
The only other thought I have here is I had the luxury of working with this insane human called Jocko Vanderkooy, he's got a consulting firm called Winnie Design, and Jocko had this like mental model, which was, if you're not expanding, you're contracting. And like, this was a model, this was a mental space we put into every post-sales team, regardless of whether you're CS or AM or whatever. And it was, I think at the end of the day, like, it's one of those, there was like a meme template, by the way, where it was like really dumb person, middle of the pack, really smart person, and that people on the edge are saying the same thing. This is one of those things that, like, I think people say is an oversimplification, but like, as I've gone through my career, I think I've realized, come to the conclusion that like Jocko was actually like the smart guy on the edge of the brilliance of like, it's not that complicated. If they're not buying more from you, they're contracting. And I think that like, even in CS, this is like a good mental model, and certainly worked for us in a bunch of different situations and companies.
I like that, especially if you pair like the trying to, if you have the right way of thinking about, I think, expanding in sales, which is adding more value, then you're always focused on, okay, maybe you want those more seats and maybe you want this cross sell. But if you're thinking about, hey, how am we constantly adding different layers and ways of thinking about value to our customers because we want to expand with them, at least you have that sense of urgency and focus that I think a lot of CS teams, especially, I don't think have if you're just responsible for, maybe it's that onboarding and continuous support. I mean, I have an interesting question for the group here, which is, I think I generally have a good sense of, at least on the AE side, like what you're looking for from a persona perspective and getting a better perspective on the CS side. But the AM is an interesting one, right? Because commercially driven, at least in the use case we're going to talk about now, is like commercially driven, you're cross-selling, you're selling new products. It's, you have that executive engagement. Let's, imagine in this case that they're, the person really owning the account strategically. But you're not going after signing new logos. So it's kind of this weird hybrid. I'm curious to get people's, this group's opinions on like, what does that person look like? Like, what do they, what are some of the words that come to mind from the most successful account managers that you've worked with or seen? Brian, you want to kick things off here?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in. So it is really interesting. I like the account manager, the sales focused account manager role quite a bit because you do get a good blend. Like you get to work with your customer for a long time in all likelihood. You do get a blend of skills and backgrounds. I love hiring folks who have BDR or AE experience, but enjoy the post-purchase conversation and enjoy the ongoing education and mapping out stakeholders and not just taking that initial deal, but really trying to think through how can I expand the footprint within the account and uncover new opportunities. But yeah, I mean, I think that the skills needed to become a good AE and a good AM are quite similar. We do a lot of the same sales training and sales enablement here at Figma for AEs and AMs. They certainly have different targets and different ways of going about it, but in this type of an account manager role, you still have to have that proactive mindset, that hunter mindset. And again, that's baked into the quota and the targets as well.
One thing as I've hired, and so I've had the opportunity to have both sales reps, pure hunters, and then account managers. And so I think they're motivated by different things. And I think it all starts with in your talent, management process, or when you're interviewing, it's like, what motivates folks, commercial folks? Like, what do they like doing? Close your eyes and imagine like you're having like your perfect day. Maybe that's not the end of the quarter when like all your deals are coming in. Aside from that, like, what are you doing? What are you actually doing? And I think you'll find people that generally, filter into two sides of this. Like Brian's talking about these folks that are really motivated and love building these deep, rich, long-term relationships with customers. And then you've got other folks who are just always interested in new conversations and proving out value and identifying problems and like helping get people to a place where they can start addressing those problems. And so I think you want, no matter what, you want people that have this relentless focus on improving customer outcomes. You want people that want to help people get better in whatever business they're in. But like, what do they like doing? Do they want to have these new conversations? Do they really want to deepen and expand and really like see the solution through? I think it all comes down to like identifying it up front and what motivates people.
Connor, any
I have no additional
hot
value
take
to
on
add.
that? Okay.
I mean, it feels a little bit like the one thing I was thinking in the back of my head is like, this is maybe a bad analogy because people get worked up about segments. It's like, what's the difference between a mid-market rep and an enterprise rep, right? Like, it's like they're very subtle. The problem here is that everyone thinks, oh, well, I want to get from mid-market to enterprise. So there's a positional mental model thing that's wrong. But like outside of that, if you asked me to build a scorecard, like we have 13 traits that we use to measure and evaluate everyone who interviews for a sales role. 13 traits. Some of those are on like pure job skills. Some of those are on sort of market knowledge, and some of those are on what we call like the intangibles. Basically, we use a like 1 to 5 scale, and so you measure a lot of boxes with data filled in, explaining what that looks like. If you asked me to look at the differences between an AM version and an AE version, they would look freakishly similar, like almost comically not different. To Alex's point, it's more like, which do you prefer and you're more successful at?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because I was like trying to get to the bottom of like, okay, like what is really the core differentiator? Because I've always been on the new business side and I'm like, yeah, it'd be interesting to do that and blah, blah, blah. And like a lot of enterprise deals look very much like account management, because you're kind of, building these small wins and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of be like, hey, I took over this account, but just trying to really understand, like, why am I picking this over that? And honestly, a lot of it might be like, where do you start your career? And like, what's kind of just the natural path that's happening and opportunities that are in front of you. And that just might be land in, enterprise account management versus enterprise sales.
I think with an account manager role, you have to enjoy the hybrid nature of it. With an AM role, more often than with an AE role, there's going to be an element of customer support. There's going to be an element of helping out with billing inquiries and moving stuff around and making adjustments and some re-education, right? So even if you're in an AM role rather than a CSM role, there's more of a likelihood that you're going to have that. And then it's not just being okay with it, it's enjoying that. Something that we really look for is folks, I always say in interviews, like, we want people who want to contribute to the build, right? Like, we're not a finished product. We want to find ways to make this more efficient. We want to work smarter than harder. You're often going to find some folks who have more of a technical CS type of a background. You'll find other folks who are more of that hunter proactive, and you want to have people that are going to bring kind of their superpower to the table and help to make the process better for everyone. I think every team, regardless of profession, you want that kind of a background. But in account management in particular, since it is a hybrid role, we look for folks who have kind of a versatile background across the entire team.
Totally. Well, to switch gears a bit for the last couple topics that we'll hit, I guess maybe going back to out from some of these details around the roles and the handoffs and all that kind of stuff, just like maybe putting on our, CRO, CEO hats, and we think about, maximizing NRR and this, kind of new focus around it versus just looking at growth, especially as, it's potentially churn is this like silent business killer, and like a couple percentage points over time really impact the business. And same thing with that super efficient way of bringing on new customers, which is your existing customers, word of mouth, et cetera. Some of those intangibles around that too. Curious to get, folks take maybe on like, to get really tactical, because, selfishly, I'm going to take some things back to Accord as we continue to build our business. Would love maybe like one do or don't really tactically, as you think about some of the biggest needle movers, either specific to the company that you're at or things that you've seen at previous companies that really move the needle around churn and expansion. So curious to, you'll give everyone.
I would love to steal this, Mike. This is
awesome.
An opinion.
Go for it.
I have so many freaking opinions on this. So I actually am really excited to hear what Alex and Brian think about this. So I am an extremely firm believer that every dollar you spend post-sales is an investment that needs a return. Like, you don't have account management or you don't have CS because you should, or because it's going to impact churn. You need to be able to prove or tie that those dollars that we're spending actually return for us, right? And I think this is an absolute garbage question, Ross, and I'm going to tell you why. And that's because, like, the easy answer is to tell you, like, the 2 or 3 things we did that meaningfully improved churn or expansion at our business, but they're so freaking different. The biggest piece of advice I could give is, like, figure out explicitly what drives churn for your business and build a post-sale motion that eliminates that. Period, full stop. Don't do any of the other cargo culty crap. Don't worry about onboarding if people get onboarded all by themselves. Don't worry about QBRs if your customer doesn't want a QBR. Like, don't worry about that junk. Like, literally just figure out why they churn and eliminate that. Or conversely, why they expand and double down on that. And I'm sure we all have examples of things we did that worked for us, but like, I feel like those are like dangerous tidbits to give out, because people will like gravitate towards like, oh, I heard so-and-so who's really smart did X. But like, if your situation doesn't have that exact problem, then you end up solving like kind of somebody, like you're applying someone else's solution to your problem.
Yeah, but it gives you a sense for like what those general things are, right? Like it's tangentially going to be related to the different cycles of their journey, right? So like, where do people fall short? Yes, I agree that the tactics, but like generally it's going to be like, hey, activations and / onboarding as a key thing. That's where a lot of people fall through. What's an idea that people have that solves that? You know what I mean? Or
yeah, but my argument would be get out of your freaking ivory tower. Don't have an idea about what solves that. Go ask the customers why they're bailing at that point, and then solve for that problem. right? Like they like it's like, yes, I agree. Activation is like a good place to pay attention because there's like a smaller specific set of problems that tend to exist in that place. But like, go genuinely understand. It's not that the customer isn't activated. That's not why they're leaving. That's never the way they would describe it. They're going to describe it in an entirely different way. So go figure out where like, I mean, for us, we see 90% of our churn. Sorry, we see half of our first year churn happen in the first 90 days. Right? Like, that's an activation and onboarding problem, but it's not really like, I don't know what the problem is. Like, we're working on
they're
it,
not
right?
gonna,
Like,
I get what you're saying, that they're not gonna say, the customer is not like, I had a problem activating. It's like, no, it's probably, my best guess would be like, that group of people probably had a similar use case that isn't maybe the core one of your product, and wasn't the highest propensity type thing to do, and then they're off the platform. And maybe you stop marketing and selling to that group of people because maybe they'll buy, but they're not the ones that are actually going to get the most value, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
My take is more that I think people tend to want to apply solutions that are easy to understand more than they want to solve the very specific, discrete problem that they have. That's, I'm sure Alex and Brian will both agree and like wildly disagree. So I'm like excited to
let's go for it.
So a couple things. Like, one, I will take a sort of a stand that like there are some instances where like there is desirable churn, right? I think we'd say most of us like want to create businesses that reduce churn, but like high cost to serve customers, people that eat up tons of your post sales team and account management team's time above their sort of like value. You do have to have some hard conversations on some of those. And we've all worked with customers or members that are huge utilizers of your team or your time individually. And you're like, I can't get to all the other things I need to do because of the demands of this. So there is some degree of churn that may be healthy. I know for a lot of people, it's hard to make those trade-offs, especially when you're early on in a company. And we certainly feel that pressure right now. What I would say across both what we're implementing at NYSHX now, but also at Flexport and at Athena Health, some of the other companies I've been, is again, apply the tactic differently to your business. But two things really stick out to me. One, have a data-driven reason that shows why people may be churning, and look for reasons and ways to help arm your teams to intervene. Like, point your teams in the right direction. Like, one of the key things we're doing right now is trying to find solutions that we can feed data in, and it will almost say, Alex, you're an account manager here today. These are the 5 people that you need to reach out to this week based on like performance leading indicators that we're seeing. Like, these people need your intervention to jump in. So I know that that's a very technical, you actually need to start with your definitions and then have a tool to be able to do that. Not everybody has that capability, but I think that's important. The second is realize that both for churn and expansion, sometimes your customers don't actually know how well they're using your service or your product. And so realize that part of account management is being able to show, hey, here's your improvement. Here are the ways that your business is getting better. And people that perform better generally want to give you more of their business. Like, if you're actually solving problems and moving the needle for them, I think that's a great place to be. But sometimes your customers that are performing the best are actually the ones that may not be able to articulate that or understand that. And that's part of, I think, an account management motion, is to help people understand where they're improving.
Interesting. Yeah, like that usage might not tie perfectly back to their feelings about how well it's going. Whereas if you're, maybe going to even Connor's perspective on it, is like, hey, if you're looking at this, not really specific to the customer, you might be like, hey, from our perspective, this is a super healthy account, it's going well. They might be like, yeah, we're using this thing, but it doesn't really help that much, or I'm not getting how much this is helping.
I'm in the tool for hours and hours, which utilization sounds great, but they're in the help center and they're in all these other places trying to figure out like what to do. So the metrics are not there. But like on our side, we have lots of people whose ocean freight and contracts are performing at 2-3 times the industry average, but they're still like, hey, I don't like this function, I don't like this thing that you do, and yet they're getting great business results. And so that's important to help them keep perspective.
Totally. Brian, around us out, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, a plus one. I guess the main thing that sticks out to me is, I think, the first point that Alex mentioned there, which is around data. When I look back like many moons ago to what some of us in the account management realm at Zendesk would have said back in the day was like the golden age, was when we started to have a really strong partnership with one data scientist in particular. It doesn't take an entire team, but when you had one data scientist who really understood customers and customer data, product usage data, engagement data, and really understood what the account management team's goals were and what we needed to deliver. And we had one person who helped us really marry those together, help build new dashboards for segmenting accounts and prioritizing your time better. you're never going to have all the headcount you want, right? And so how can you work smarter? And I've seen that continue on, right? And other roles that I've been in since then is, hey, if we have someone who's really dedicated to us and can help us better understand our customers, we're just going to perform so much better.
For sure. Yeah. It's not just about the one-to-one conversations for all this stuff that's going to lead to those goals. It definitely takes the entire company and organization and all that tracking stuff, which feels like, it's a huge investment up front when you can be like, hey, should we just have another person to take these conversations? Like, can we not immediately be having, more better, onboarding and all this kind of stuff? But yeah, having that kind of person across the team, finding the right time to do that is super important. But we're wrapping up here. I'm sure people got to get back to closing out their month or quarter. I'm sure you guys got a lot of emails and Slacks and whatever to get back to, but really appreciate you taking the time. For the folks that are joining us live or watching the recording, and we'll share that on the blog post, and we'll summarize some of these learnings and everything and share that with the world. But thanks again, guys, and thanks for everyone who joined.